Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Kim, and I hope you're having a fabulous day today. If you are interested in true crime stories like I am, I hope that you would consider hitting that subscribe button. But either way, thanks for being here. Crystal Todd was only 17 years old when this brutal attack happened, and she was dumped into a ditch like a piece of trash. Even worse, as law enforcement and as the family would later discover, she was tragically slaughtered by someone she called a friend. Have you ever had that friend that you trusted and you never thought would ever harm you? And all the meanwhile, they are strategizing, they are creating a plan, and at the right time, they're going to strike. This is exactly what happened in Crystal's case. Let's talk about Crystal. On November 11th, 1991, 17-year-old Crystal Todd was excited to go out and have some fun with her friends. She had been in a little bit of trouble recently, and she had just gotten her car back 4 days earlier. So she's pumped. She just got her car back. She's like, let's go out and have some fun. She wasn't much of a partier, but recently she had been drinking and then tried to drive home. Instead, she crashed into a telephone pole. She was fine physically, but she was charged with a DUI. According to her friend Carla, Crystal said that the officer pulled her over, said that he would drop the DUI charge if she became an informant. She flat out refused the offer, and then later the charge which was standard in the area at the time she was charged with. Her mom had just given her the car, a brand new 1991 Toyota Celica, as an early graduation gift. This was her first night having her license back, so she was very excited to go out and have some fun. She had plans with her cousin Kevin, but he forgot to call her back, so Crystal had called the boy that she liked, Jamie, before she left the house, but he didn't answer the phone, and this was before anyone had cell phones, so this was a normal thing to do, to make plans earlier in the day, and then you drive around to spots where you knew everybody was at and where it's happening, hoping to run into friends or find a house party. Crystal was waiting for her friend Carla as she left her job at Coastal Mall at 9 p.m. They decided to take Crystal's car to a house party that a friend Dana was having. They weren't at the party very long before a boy Crystal had dated off and on, Sammy, showed up with another girl. It was very uncomfortable at best because Sammy and Crystal were off at this point, but he was acting like she didn't even exist. At one point, the other girl even came and sat between Crystal and Carla on the couch, which was very weird for both of them. So the two friends decided to leave. Carla wanted to go and have a word with Sammy for being a horse's ass, but Crystal called her off and they left. Crystal had a curfew of 11:15, and that's what time they got her back to her car. So she was a little late getting home that night. Crystal's curfew wasn't until 12:30, and she wasn't really ready to go home just yet. So she told Carla that she might go grab something to eat and find something else to do. As I said, Crystal's curfew was at 12:30, and she wasn't much of a rule breaker. So when she didn't show up and it turned 3 a.m., her mom, Bonnie Faye, was frantic and called 911. She'd been worried much earlier and had already reached out to Carla, who told her she knew of Crystal's night. Bonnie Faye called some of Crystal's other friends, including a very close friend named Ken Register, who she called at 1:15. He said that he had just arrived home himself and that he hadn't seen her. He did know there were a few house parties that night. He would call around to see if he could find her for her. He also told her mom he would call the local hospitals to see if Crystal had been brought in for whatever reason. The three of them, Bonnie Faye, Carla, and Ken, made calls, but none of them got any closer to finding Crystal's location, which led Bonnie Faye to call 911 at 3 a.m. This 911 call is what I call laughable at best. I'm sorry, I usually applaud our dispatchers because they have a really tough job. I mean, they are the first responders of a crisis. And before I tell you about this call, let me assure you, it was too late for Crystal anyways. So when Bonnie starts detailing that her daughter Crystal is missing, she gives the year, make, and model of the car. And yes, the Toyota was brand new as a gift. The license plate was personalized that read CTODD. That's when the dispatcher said, "Is this Bonnie Faye? Bonnie Faye Todd?" She says, "Yes, that's me." He tells her that his name is Mike Hill and reminds her that he taught Crystal piano lessons when she was little. She tells him that she remembers him and is happy to have someone that she knows on the other line, to help her, and that would actually put this in motion. I bet she felt relieved. Then Mike tells her that when Crystal comes home, she could call him back and he'll send a deputy over to give her a little scare to make sure that she doesn't pull this stunt again. He says everybody knows Crystal, Miss Bonnie Faye, and she is a good girl. She is not the type to get involved with trouble or be up to no good. He doesn't take a report. I repeat, he doesn't take a report. He doesn't get any information, nothing. Then they hang up. That's it. Simply outrageous. At 8 a.m., Bonnie Faye calls 911 again, and this time she's more insistent. She tells the dispatcher, so the dispatcher sends out Horry County Sheriff's deputy to take a report. Am I a child? Yes. Crystal was last seen wearing blue jeans, a blue t-shirt with a pattern on it, brown shoes, and a brown leather jacket. She was 5'3", had brown hair, blue eyes, weighed about 115 pounds. And we've talked about her car because they needed to look for that as well. She had tons of friends who were already out searching. The whole town was searching for Crystal. The population of Conway was only 10,000 when Crystal went missing, and it had a small town feel to it. Everyone that knew her loved her. I know people say that, but in this case, I really believe they meant it. Crystal Faye Todd was born on January 4th, 1974 in the Jupiter Bay area of Conway, South Carolina, to her mom, Bonnie Faye, and her dad, Junior B. Crystal had a half-brother named Donnie. He was Junior's son from his first marriage. Their parents wanted a big family, but they only had 2 of them, and they truly cherished each other. They also had loads of aunts and uncles and cousins and also lived in Conway. Sadly, her dad died when she was only 11 years old, so Bonnie Faye raised Crystal by herself on her own. Crystal was very involved in the local church. She sang in the youth choir, and she helped her mom out at home as well. She was a bit of a compulsive cleaner, and she really hated cigarette smoke. Like, that becomes important that she just does not like cigarette smoke at all. Her mom smoked in the house, so Crystal was always cleaning and airing out the house, her car as well, because sometimes her mom smoked in there as well. It was the day and age where you just kind of smoked everywhere and anywhere. Her friends and her family described her as an outgoing, cute brunette with olive skin tone because she was always deeply tanned.
Crystal was very easygoing. She loved everybody.
I had good memories just being with her. She was my life, I'll tell you what. Anything we done, we had fun together.
Lots of friends were out looking for Crystal that morning. They had started when Bonnie Faye called them in the middle of the night. One of the searcher was her good friend, Ken Register. If you remember, in the early morning hours when Crystal didn't make it home, Ken was one of the people that Bonnie Faye called. She had talked to him at 1:15 a.m., and he had said that he had just gotten home from Dodge City Park Raceway. He was trying to eat a late night snack, but he would call the houses where he knew the parties had been and would check all the hospitals. So he's the one that's like, I'm going to help. I'm going to figure this out with you. While the investigation starts and the searchers head out all over Conway, 2 hunters that were brothers were on their way into the woods a few miles away from Conway Middle School. At 9:10 a.m., Horry County 911 got another call that was about Crystal. When the brothers were driving down Collins Jolly Road, they saw a huge pool of blood in the road. So they stopped the truck and got out. It was hunting season, so they thought someone had shot a deer and the blood was from that. They were just following the trail to see if they could score a deer. They followed the blood, which led them to a ditch on the side of the road where they saw a shoe. Then they realized that the shoe was on a foot. They got close enough to see that it was not a deer. It was a mutilated and bloodied body of a young girl. They ran back to their truck after vomiting. They drove to their sister's home to make that call. Detective Bill Knowles from SLED, which is the State Law Enforcement Division in South Carolina, who would be the lead on this case, met with the brothers and their sisters at home and asked Lloyd to take him to the crime scene, one of the hunters to take him to the crime scene. Crystal's mutilated body had been dragged from a large pool of blood and thrown into a ditch. She had fought hard. Signs of struggle were evident in the blood on her body. The medical examiner would find that she had over 30 different cuts and stabs, 7 bruises, and 3 abrasions. She had 2 stab wounds in her back that cut into her spinal cord, effectively paralyzing her. There were 3 stab wounds in the left side of her head that were done with such force, each penetrated into her brain. The entire attack, the overkill, because several wounds had not bled, meaning she was already gone, and he kept stabbing. Her pants and her underwear were pulled down. Her shirt and bra were ripped open. Her face was covered in blood. Her throat was cut from ear to ear. She had been stabbed in a linear pattern down her chest, and she had been disemboweled. So that means she was cut and stabbed so brutally, part of her intestines came out. Semen was later found in her mouth, rectum, vagina, and bruises to her vaginal and rectal area were consistent with brutal vaginal and anal rape. When they moved her body to turn it over, they saw her class ring on her finger, and in the inside of that ring, it read, Crystal Faye Todd. Detective Knowles had a missing persons report, and the search for Crystal stopped. Then he left to go tell Bonnie Faye the news, and I do not want his job. That same day, Crystal's car was found parked a short distance from her body at a local middle school with her purse and keys inside, and the doors were locked. Right away, Jamie and Sammy both needed to be looked at as suspects in the investigation. As you probably know, when someone is murdered, the closest to the victim are looked at first. Jamie and Crystal had just started dating. The relationship was very new. He did have a solid alibi, so he was cleared immediately. Sammy was also cleared very quickly. Many people saw him and were with him all night the next day. Each person they investigated consented to have their blood drawn and buccal swab taken. That's a Q-tip swab from inside your mouth, and they gently scrape your cheek for cells gathering saliva. They would be fingerprinted, and basically anything else that the investigators asked for, they wanted to get themselves ruled out so they could find the real one. These are very early days of DNA in criminal investigations and, prosecutions. In fact, that would be the first case DNA would be used in South Carolina for criminal prosecution. 1 week later, SLED had investigated over 200 leads, and a reward of $10,000 had been offered. The only person to have a problem were her dear friend Ken. But he didn't tell the police. Instead, he told Bonnie Faye. See, Ken had been around Crystal's mom a lot since the murder. He was with her after her body was found and even helped to pick out the casket. He was a pallbearer at Crystal's funeral. He was even seen putting his boutonniere into her casket before she was buried. It will make more sense, but let me tell you, that is just, I would have her exhumed to take that boutonniere out of there. So instead of doing everything that he could to catch, his dear friend's killer, he was doing just the opposite. He showed up at Bonnie Faye's house frantic, saying that because the police haven't found Crystal's killer, he didn't want to give up his DNA because he'll be seen as the killer. That makes absolute sense to nobody. So his theory was they're going to use his blood sample to frame him. Bonnie Faye had complete faith in SLED and their investigation. So she told him he's just being ridiculous. Just go give him your blood, get it over with, and you'll be ruled out. But after he left that day, she realized how strange this conversation was. So she called Knowles, the detective, and let him know about this weird conversation. SLED already had an appointment to meet with Ken, and they planned to ask him for his blood. When he came in to meet with them the next day, which was January 13th, 1992, he seemed happy to talk about Crystal and, Crystal's boyfriends and her habits. Anything they wanted to know, he was an open book. He explained that he had dated her back in 1988, but said that he never had intercourse with her. Even back then, they were better off as best friends, he would describe their relationship. He also provided his own alibi for that night, which was that he was with his current girlfriend. He told investigators that he got home between 11:30 and 12. His mom could vouch for him. Ken just seems like a really sweet guy, doesn't he? So as the interview was concluding, they asked Ken for a blood sample. He said, "What do you need that for?" And they replied simply, "DNA?" And then, of course, him playing, "What do you mean DNA?" At the time, it probably wasn't an uncommon question to ask. I guess in our day and age, we know exactly what DNA was. But this was, of course, 1992. So they explained it to him because they want him to know exactly how important it was. And they also offered that he could discuss it with his mother. They said, yes, of course, you can talk to your mom. But he was the 50th person that they have done this to, and none of them need to ask somebody else. So this was kind of strange that he wanted to do that. Everyone else just wanted to find the killer, or at least rule themselves out so that they could find the real killer, which worked. He gave them blood. They gave him a buccal swab, pubic hairs, head hairs, finger and palm prints. While we are waiting for the DNA results to come back, let's talk about Ken Register. Johnny Kenneth Register II was born on April 13th, 1973. He was born to his mom Shirley and his dad Kenneth. Like Crystal, he was born and raised in the tobacco farming community of Conway. He graduated from Conway High School, where he played football and was being considered an above average student. He was very involved in the church growing up, and he had recently got back into the habit of going to church. He and his dad had recently built a new altar for their church, and they had installed it the morning that Crystal was murdered. He led the music for the church as well. He was 5'8", had blue eyes, and he was considered to be a good-looking guy, and so he dated a lot. One notable thing is that they did date in 1988, but recently Even though he had a girlfriend, he was really trying to get back with Crystal, but Crystal really wasn't interested. Bonnie Faye had always thought that Ken was a good guy, so she encouraged Crystal, to go out with him, but Crystal said he always reeked of cigarette smoke, and she didn't like that, and that all he wanted was sex anyways, so she didn't want to date him. Much to the surprise of the investigators, they did get a DNA match, and it was a 9-band match to Ken register. I don't know much about banded matches, but at the trial, the forensic expert testified that usually 3 out of 9 is, common. But to get a 9 out of 9 is like the best match. It's extraordinary that he definitely was the one that left that DNA. On February 18th, 1992, Detective Knowles arrested Ken at his job at Santa Cooper Electric. That's one of South Carolina's largest utilities, and he was shocked. He shouted that he was being framed and he was just making a scene of the whole thing, said that he wasn't involved and had to be dragged out. The investigators knew that they needed a confession because the only true physical evidence they had was the DNA. Now, in this day and age, that's all you need, but back then it was new and it's confusing. There were fingerprints in blood on the back of Crystal's arm, probably from where he grabbed and dragged her to the ditch, but there was no ridge definition, so they couldn't get an actual fingerprint. They took molds of the tire tracks and shoe prints, but never found a match. Although they searched the area around the crime scene, they never found the knife. They were afraid that the entire issue of DNA would confuse a jury because it was so new. So the strategy was to get him to confess. We just need a confession from him. From 10:20 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., Ken cried and asked for his mama. I'm not making fun or joking. That is quite literally what he was saying. My mama knows I was home. I need to talk to my mama. Of course, he was 18, and so the only thing he was allowed to ask for was a lawyer, which they actually told him that he can do that. He didn't want that. He wanted to talk and see his mama. Eventually, at 1:30 p.m., they took a break, and then the investigators went to the Register house to see the parents. The purpose of the visit was to explain to Shirley, the mom, that the DNA had come back as a match to Ken. Shirley had no interest in coming into the police station, but she actually wrote a note for the investigators to give to her son. So just think about that. Your son has been arrested. The investigators are willing to let you go and see him, and you send a Post-it note. So this is the letter word for word. Ken, I love you. I know where you were at. We know when you left the racetrack, and I know when you got home. I'll stand by you. Love, your mama. Now, before we go further, let's think this through. If he did really go straight home, then mama saw him covered in blood and probably washed the bloody clothes in excess and will probably make a lot of excuses for him. I don't understand parents like this, but it happens time after time. You think you're protecting your child, but you're not. If you think about the letter that she wrote, it seems like she's telling him that she will be his alibi. Like, I got you, don't worry. Which is what he had been saying for hours inside that room. That might have been why the investigators went to see her, to see how far she was willing to take it. Either way, when they got back to the station and go into the interrogation room again at 2:20 p.m., they do not give him the letter. Of course they didn't. Why would they do that? What on earth did she even think that they would do that? They told him that they had gone to see her. She didn't want to come to the station. She was very upset and she loved him, and that she wanted him to tell the police everything that happened that night. Most of that was true, to be fair, kinda. They're allowed to lie. They then asked Ken if he had asked God for forgiveness for what he had done. Ken lost it and he started sobbing and said yes, he did. His confession started at 3 p.m. They started to use an audio recording, but that spooked Ken. So there was a lot of officers in the room, so they all just pretty much took notes of the situation just to keep him talking. He said he had saw Crystal at a red light. They followed each other to the middle of the school to park her car. Do you remember how I said Crystal was going to try to go find another friend to hang out with? Maybe she thought that she and Ken were going to grab some food and eat it at the park. Who knows? He was a trusted friend, and she didn't really want to go home. It was kind of her first night out, and he says that the purpose to go to the school was to have some consensual relations. But Carla and even Crystal herself said that she wasn't interested in Ken anymore like that. He said that they parked on CJ Road, had relations in his car, but he didn't use a condom. He said she got mad after he had ejaculated inside of her. She hit him in the chest, got out of the car, and then got dressed and said if she was pregnant, she was going to say that she was raped. He said he was confused, angry, and just wanted her to stop screaming at him. So he pulled out a hunting knife he had between his seats, got out, and started stabbing her. The detectives wanted more details, but he said he was so frantic at the time that he couldn't remember anything more. He said he was very scared about what he had done, so he dragged her body over to the ditch, threw the knife as far as he could, and then he drove home as fast as he could. There are issues with his confession, though, because first, there were forcible, vaginal, and tearing consistent with a sustained violent assault. And he never mentioned anything about oral or anal at all. Also, he made it her fault, saying he only stabbed her because she wouldn't stop screaming. If she would have just stopped screaming and just continued on his story that she consented, but then got mad and then there was no condom, and so she threatened to cry assault. This is not a typical response for women, not her first go-to at least. Perhaps it is what he would have logically thought of at the time, which doesn't make sense. If he did indeed drive home as fast as he could without cleaning up, and you can consider the 30 plus wounds on Crystal, he would have been covered in blood, and he still lived with his mom. That's why he kept on saying over and over he didn't want to talk until he could talk and see his mom. Because he lived with her and he knew, or at least thought, she would be his alibi. But if you take just his confession, he said he drove straight home after. That means his mom at the time at least saw his bloody clothes or towels, if not her bloody son, and then the letter that she sent him to the jail. She was letting him know that she knew he was at home at the right time, but basically just saying she'll be his alibi. So how the story goes of his mom is, while Ken had been calling Crystal a loose party girl to the police, was actually Shirley Register had been doing this around town. While he was confessing, they were actually executing a police warrant on the Register home, his bedroom, and his vehicle. They were not able to find the clothes he was wearing that night. Even though his car had been cleaned, they did find blood on the steering wheel, the gear shift, the door handles, and they found the box the knife came in. At 15 years old, so we'll back up 3 years, Ken worked at an auto shop run by his uncle. A young woman named Julie brought in her car to have some work done on it. Shortly after, she and her mom, they lived together, started getting obscene phone calls. They talked to the phone company, who at the time only narrowed down the calls to the area of the town. So Julie grew bold and started saying on the phone, playing detective, which meant talking to the creep. Eventually, in the background, she could hear sounds from what sounded like an auto repair shop. So Julie went in to complain. Ken's uncle apologized, but told her that they didn't have anyone there that would do that. Julie saw Ken at work that day, followed him, and waited until she had his number. She called him at home and verified that it had been him who was making the obscene phone calls, and then finally were able to call the police on him. All the time leading up to it, there wasn't anything the police could do. 15 years old Ken Register was arrested, but because he was a minor, he was released into the custody of his sister, and his file was turned over to the Department of Youth Services. Then 3 years later, when Julie saw that Ken had been arrested for Crystal's murder, she called the investigators to let them know about the phone calls and wanted to know what happened to the juvenile case. Ken's aunt worked at the Department of Youth Services, and she had dismissed the case. This family just wants to cover each other up. How does that work out for you? What bothered the investigators about Julie's cause is that Ken talked about opening up her and raping her, making her scream, anal, and using objects to inflict pain. These were very obscene, harsh, abrasive phone calls. This wasn't your phone call. No, this was pretty bad. Less than 2 months before Crystal's murder, Ken exposed himself to 2 girls on the campus of Coastal Carolina College. He pulled up in his car, asked for directions. Then when they got close and could see into the window, his penis was out and he was pleasuring himself. They yelled at him and he started to drive off. But one of the girls said, "Hey, wait." So Ken hit the brakes, which this girl is like super smart, but she did that just so they could get the license plate number. So he was arrested for this incident for exposure after the women picked him out on a lineup. So he was waiting to go to court for that when what happened to Crystal happened. When the prosecutor found out about the indecent exposure case, he pushed Crystal's case back so that one could be tried first. Then it could be used against him in his murder trial. He was found guilty of indecent exposure. At the beginning of April 1992, Ken was indicted on first-degree murder, first-degree criminal sexual conduct, kidnapping, buggery, and sodomy. When this indictment happened, this is when the town found out Ken had confessed. Just 2 months later, Crystal's high school class graduated without her. Her friends saved a seat for her with 2 white roses on it. Her friends also helped raise money for her headstone. On January 13th, 1993, the murder trial started. The prosecution focused on Ken's confession and also the DNA. Ken would say that he had an alibi because he was with his girlfriend and that he left her at 11:35 and got to his mom's house at 12:15. His mom and girlfriend, of course, were both his alibi, and they would testify to these times. Ken did testify that he took back most of his confession, but he did nothing to basically help himself. The prosecution also had Dr. Parks Dietz, a forensic psychologist, take the stand to explain what a sexual sadist is. So in a nutshell, for you and for me, it is a person who is gratified by someone else's pain. Bottom line, the pain cannot be consensual. On January 22nd, Ken was found guilty on all charges. On January 25th, he was sentenced to life in prison plus 35 years. The jury said that they couldn't bring themselves to sentence an 18-year-old to death. They also said that it wasn't the DNA that convinced them. They followed all the evidence and the witnesses. They considered it, but they weren't sure what to make of it. They believed it was a solid investigation. They said that if he really was one of Crystal's best friends, he wouldn't have been so emotionless. He appealed, of course. It was denied. Mama still believes in him. She has had the DNA retested multiple times. I don't know what proof this woman needs, but he was recently eligible to apply for parole, but he was denied. This man should not get out of jail. Anyone convicted of these types of criminal acts before 1996 is eligible for parole after serving a third of their sentences. In theory, life equals 90 years. That doesn't mean that he would actually get out, but he has the opportunity to apply. He is eligible for another review in February 24th of 2024, so just under a year. He lives in Broad River Correctional Institute in Columbia, South Carolina. There are ways to affect this. There is already a petition in the works to keep him in. I will link that below, and long term, you can always write to the parole board. You guys, this was, what is it? A sheep in wolf's clothing? Like, this was her friend. And then he comes back to the family and plays the I want to help card and then helps pick out. He was getting off on that. He was 100, it's not a doubt in my mind, he was not getting off on being a part of her funeral arrangements and then sticking his boutonniere in her casket. I was like, what? He did what? This man did the most to Crystal and then was there. Oh my gosh. It's so sad. I feel so bad for that family. But they didn't know this was, her friend who was always a good kid, an exceptional student.
Can't come over here about 2 or 3 times a week. He'd come out blowing the horn, waving at me and everything, and all the time asking if he could do anything for me. And
I remember him coming to the house, and he was always asking questions. He was like, well, have you heard anything else? Do they have any leads?
I mean, anyways, so you guys let me know your thoughts. Let's leave a pink heart in the comments for poor Crystal and her family, her surviving family. I can only imagine. So I just want to say thanks to all my channel members and my Patreons for supporting me. If you would like early access to new videos or decide the cases I cover next, you can do so by clicking the join button from your desktop, or there is a video in the description box on how to do it from your phone. Well, if you guys have made it to the end, you guys are rock stars. And I love you to death. There are more true crime stories in my Crimey Cases playlist if you'd like to check them out. Either way, stay safe, my loves. And remember, if you see something, say something. Bye.